Hey, hey. Oh. Testing? Right. I was just, no, I didn't even. I guess. Okay, so we're gonna get our straight. Let me see this. Straight. Let's see this. Okay, so, you know.
Great start.
Thank you.
That's a great way to start. Thank you.
Sometimes we talk about, that was this morning's offering. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but sometimes we say thank you and this is the
Let's do it. Oh, I'm still on.
You're on? Okay.
Yeah.
After both.
Yeah. That's fine. No. Yeah. Right. Okay. Hi, good morning. We'll give folks another minute or two to make their way back here. I know it's good to get to visit and gather, so we'll give folks another minute or two, and we will go ahead and begin shortly after. It's going in and out? Is it? Okay. Is this better? Use a handheld? Well, okay. Keep testing. 1, 2, 3. Is it better? 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 Y'all can hear me okay? It's good? All right. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. It's really good to see all of you this morning. We give thanks for a really powerful worship service. Especially want to thank my dear sister and friend, Reverend Michelle McLean, who gave us so much to reflect upon, to think about, but also to feel, to experience. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. We are excited to get to see one another in person, to see many of our partners gathered from around the world, from Brazil, Cuba, Mexico, the Republic of Georgia, Zimbabwe, South Africa. I'm excited to get to be here. I am trained as a historian of West Africa, the African diaspora. And in academic settings, it's important that we start with a recognition of the limitations of the scope. So one of the things that I do want to acknowledge as we, I think I went out. All right, as we have this conversation on decolonization, it's important to acknowledge that right now, given the capacity and limitation of the team, given the capacity and limitations of the team, most of this conversation is in English. But we have a number of partners and friends here who are Spanish speaking as well. And we have translation happening via digital connections. But I just want to sort of note that, right? That as we move forward and progress, these are things that we certainly pay attention to. Okay, let's get straight into this. I am entitling this conversation. I know that the writing is a bit small. Don't get too attached to that. It's mostly for me to keep myself organized. But I'm entitling this conversation, Discourse on Decolonization, Theory, History, and the Deconstruction of the Logic of a Colonizing Christianity. The title of this lecture, Discourse on Decolonization, comes out of one of my favorite and most important, I would say, anti-colonial texts, Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. Aimé Césaire was the Martinique poet who shortly after the Second World War wrote this polemic, 40 or so pages, originally in French, to wage ideological war against colonialism. It's something like an intellectual Molotov cocktail. He's starting a fight. And he's doing so because he's living in the midst of a colonized situation, and he wants to give language to the impact of colonization. So he will be a primary interlocutor with us this morning as we theorize some about this, look some at history, and talk just a little bit about how we begin to move forward in this deconstructive process. I mean, I think Reverend Mia and Reverend Ben have already helped us tremendously. So let's go to the first slide. This is how he starts. He says, Europe is indefensible. Europe is indefensible. Do we see that? I want y'all to see it before I read it. And I want y'all to think about that, because I can already feel, say, wait a second. I told you he was starting a fight. Okay? I'll just read it. Europe is indefensible. This is how he begins. Europe is indefensible morally, spiritually. And today, that indictment is brought out against it on a world scale by the tens of millions who, from the depths of slavery, rise up as judges. The colonialists may kill in Indochina, torture in Madagascar, imprison in Black Africa, and crack down in the West Indies. The essential thing here is to see clearly, is to think clearly, to think dangerously, to answer the question, what exactly is colonization? To agree what it is not, Césaire writes. To agree that it is neither evangelization, nor philanthropic enterprise, nor a desire to push back the frontiers of ignorance, disease, tyranny, nor a project undertaken for the glory of God, To admit once and for all without flinching at the consequences that the decisive actors of colonization are the adventurer and the pirate, the gold digger and the merchant appetite enforce the civilizations which for internal reasons extend to the world scale the competition of antagonistic economies. Okay, so they're using really big language. But what he's talking about, the argument that he's engaging to help sort of set the scene for some of this conversation, is Zehyoue is saying that there's a whole logic, there's a whole lie that emerged, that developed by the time he's writing in 1948 from Paris. After the Second World War, Paris is still rebuilding, Berlin is still rebuilding, London is still rebuilding. Europe is looking around, they're asking ourselves, how did we find ourselves in this moment of human catastrophe? And what Zehyoue says, well, do you really want to know the answer to that? He says, well, the answer is colonization. That the logic of colonization is a logic that leads to this type of destruction. But we've told ourselves that it's something other, that it's good, that it's an extension of civilization, that it's a cure for ignorance. Okay, let's keep going just a little bit. We're dealing with the theory. Zehyoue writes, my turn to state an equation. Colonization equals thingification. I hear storms. They talk to me about progress, about achievements, about diseases cured, improved standards of living. I'm talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed. This is what Mia was talking about. Magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. I'm talking about millions of people sacrificed to the Congo River. I'm talking about natural economies disrupted, food crops destroyed, agricultural development solely towards the mother country. I'm talking about the looting of products, the looting of raw materials. I'm talking about abuses. They pride themselves on abuses eliminated. I too talk about abuses, about how the old tyrants get along very well with the new ones. They want to talk about civilization. I want to talk about proletarianization. I make a systematic defense of the non-European societies that were anti-capitalist, democratic, cooperative. I make a defense of societies that were destroyed by imperialism. I told y'all he was starting to fight. So why is he so intense? He's so intense as an anti-colonial or post-colonial. We can have conversation about that if you want to know about more of the difference, sort of a dispute on that. He's so intense because he is the product of this history. Like his counterpart, Frantz Fanon, who was his student in Martinique, Aimé Césaire signed up to fight with France in the Second World War. He bought in the idea that France's war was his war. Then he gets there, he looks around and says, wait a second, we're fighting for France. Don't worry, we'll bring y'all in here because there's a little bit of distance. We can look at France. Says, I'm fighting for France. They got black folk from Senegal, black folk from Gabon. And they're sending them to the front lines first to die. The Americans did that too in the First and Second World War. Even as there's this campaign against fascism in Italy, Germany, Japan, black folk are saying, oh, there's deep racism in the trenches. We got to reckon with that. So Césaire, with this theory, this revolt, poetic revolt. It's saying, look, we got to deal with the fact that colonization is violence. So how do we get here? How did we get to colonization and violence? And perhaps maybe more essential to you all's curiosity, what does our practice of Christianity have to do with it? Let's seek to answer this question in part. It's a partial response because we only have so much time. Colonization as practice in modernity or the modern times comes out of the Crusades, the Western European Christian conflict with the Islamic Mediterranean over the Holy Land. This plays a major factor. In some ways, the Crusades continues in the modern day nation states. We'll deal with that later. It also emerges from European expansion. Europeans' movements beyond the continent of Europe to the Americas, north and south, to the islands of the Caribbean, to Africa. Because, as we talked about this morning, that movement, that expansion, didn't just come with curiosity, it came with an imposition of power. Las Casas, who was a Jesuit priest who would later come to accompany Columbus, wrote the histories of Columbus. This is how we have many primary sources about the Columbian expeditions to the Americas. Writes that when Columbus first arrives to the Americas, to Cuba, the first thing he says, though, is that with 50 men, we could enslave all these people. 1494. Las Casas also writes, while I was in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months. Some mothers even drowned their babies from sheer desperation. In this way, husbands died in mines, wives died at work, children died from the lack of milk. And in a short time, this land, which was so great, so powerful, so fertile, was depopulated. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature, and now I tremble as I write. When I arrived in Hispaniola in 1508, La Casa says there were 60,000 people living on the island, including the Indians, so that from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and mines. Who in future generations will believe this? I, myself, writing it as a knowledgeable eyewitness, can hardly believe it. Let me right quick. It's okay. I don't need it. Thank you, though. It's okay. I'm good. Las Casas lays out from this time what exactly is happening. Now, he's interesting because, as Willie Jennings tells us in The Christian Imagination, he is sent as a part of the Jesuit expedition to support the colonizing project. Initially, he's on board with it. But then he has a change of heart. He's like, dang, this is terrible. This is what we're doing. It's he converts out of it, records some of this for us. That's why we got it. But there are so many other religious entities, Christian entities, that were wholly participatory. Okay. The Crusades, Europe's expansion in the Americas leads to theft of land. Reverend Ben alluded to this earlier. Leads to genocide. I mean, one estimate said that prior to 1500, that there were 100 million people living in the Americas, that by the end of that century, the indigenous population was less than 10 million. It's an estimate, it's a dramatic estimate, but even if it's partially true, I mean, this is what we're contending with. That genocide leads to what Walter Rodney says is European slavery, the European Atlantic slave trade. For 4 centuries, Europe moves nearly 12.5 million people from West and West Central Africa to the Americas. This effort is initially began by the Portuguese and the Spanish. It's given legitimacy as early as 1455 by Pope Nicholas V, who gives Spain and Portugal permission to invade, capture, search out, vanquish, seize, and subdue all enemies of Christ, wheresoever, whosoever, and claim the dukedoms, principalities, kingdoms, dominions, and reduce them and their personhoods to perpetual slavery. It's a direct quote. So colonization is all tied up in the expansion of Christianity. Now, Reverend Mia is absolutely correct that when Jesus and his friends were trying to do what they were trying to do, before Constantine got involved, it wasn't so colonial. But then as it spread through Europe, through Rome, through the Germanic kingdoms, later to the nation states that would emerge from Western Europe, later to North America, it had become a thoroughly colonizing project. It's very important. It's not just the Portuguese, it's not just the Spanish. The Dutch will also join them. The British and the French will join them. The Americans, when they cease to be British and French and Dutch and German and Spanish, will join them. We got to think about this process. Enslavement, enslaving the Atlantic slave trade will continue for 400 years. From the 1500s to the very last recorded slave ship that we know of coming to at least North America in 1867. There's a record of this in Zora Neale Hurston's Bear Coon. Cujo tells his story of being trafficked to the United States after the Civil War. There was still slave trading happening. The Atlantic slave trade doesn't really end for Brazil until 1888, 12 years before the 20th century. So for 400 years, tens of millions, W.E. Du Bois says our 12.5 million people number is low, that it had to be double the amount. But by the 19th century, European powers, in particular England, aided by African rebellion in Haiti, in Cuba, in South Carolina, in Virginia, in Barbados, that pushed them has a change of heart. The incentives of the Industrial Revolution also help as well, in which slavery becomes obsolete. Now you need manufactured goods and raw materials that can be gotten directly from a source. So there's a change of heart. There's a burgeoning abolitionist movement. And Britain takes the lead, transitions from slavery to colonialism, and as the world's best naval power. By the end of that century, Britain would note that the sun never set on the Union Jack because anywhere in the world, the British flag was flying at any time during the day. The church was an essential part of this. Over the 19th century, these European countries began showing a renewed interest in learning about the map of Africa to support the rise of industrial capitalism. This is very important. Scholars like Walter Rodney and Eric Williams help us to understand this relationship between slavery and industrial capitalism, which is why we can't talk about capitalism without talking about its relationship to colonization, to enslavement. So how do you decolonize without that framework? One of the key ways that European nations did this, particularly on the African continent, is by moving from the former slave trading basis through the river valleys that they were exploring, by hiring explorers such as the Scottish explorer Mungo Park, the French explorer René Caillet, the French explorer Pierre de Brazzaville, the American explorer Henry Morton Stanley, working for Leopold II to map out Africa. As a part of this, Mungo Park, for example, claimed to have discovered the Niger River. But Bantu-speaking people had been migrating along that river valley for at least 1,500 years. But this exploration, just in the case of Africa, ultimately and nearly led to a conflict among European nations that preceded the First World War. There was almost a First World War at the end of the 19th century over African territory. France and Britain were competing over the Senegal and Gambia rivers. France and Belgium competing over the Congo River. Britain had an interest in the Zambezi River Valley. So to avoid this conflict, the new leader of the newly unified Germany says, we don't have to do this. We're gentlemen. How about y'all come to Berlin? Let's have a conference. Let's talk. And so they did this in October of 1884. Every European power sent a representative. The Americans sent representatives too. Don't leave yourselves out. They take this map of the African continent and they carve out for themselves slices of the magnificent African cake. Another direct quote from the records of the meeting. They partition it for themselves. They decide that to avoid war, the operating principle will be the principle of effective occupation. If you can show that you're actively governing this territory, you can claim it as yours. So this led to a map of Africa in which much of West Africa, particularly around the Senegal River and the Niger River, was controlled by France, Other portions of the bend of the Niger River controlled by the British. The Germans were sure to get theirs in Cameroon, in Southwest Africa and Southeast Africa. Leopold II wanted Belgium for himself. The British and the French couldn't decide on the Gambia and Senegal River, so Britain carved out in the midst of Senegal rather, the country of Gambia. And this legacy of European colonization of Africa remains today. Every time I look at this map, it's so interesting. Colonization, however, did not happen overnight, and it did not happen exclusively by force. That map that we just saw is a map that was made possible by the 3 C's of colonization: conquest, force; commerce, capitalism; and Christianity. Now, we could talk about all of them, but we got to talk about Christianity. Christian missionaries, as early as the 15th century, but also as late as the 20th and 21st centuries, were some of the most consistent agents of colonization. My mother, who is from Zehyoue in Nimba County, Liberia, was born in 1955, talks about the moment that the missionaries made it to her village. My grandfather was an elephant hunter. The practice of some of the people of Nimba County was to be polygamous. My grandfather had two wives, and he had a traditional name. His name was Zehyoue, which is my second middle name. And as the proselytizing process started, the missionaries told my grandfather the way that he structured his family was against the rules of God, and that he had to change his name. My mother said he listened to some of it, but not all of it. But we can pinpoint particular moments when the emergence of Christianity in certain contexts is tied to cultural violence. Okay, it doesn't mean that, and I think Mia and Ben were sort of getting on this, it doesn't mean that every missionary had the intention to commit cultural genocide. But it does mean that in a context in which we weren't very explicit or thoughtful about what our presence elsewhere meant, is that could be the consequence. This is characterized very well in one of my favorite novels, published in 1958 by the great Nigerian writer Chinua Achebe. And Chinua Achebe is very difficult to see. At the pinnacle of this novel, he's talking about this sort of land dispute between two brothers, a brother who is converted and a brother who is not converted. And the pinnacle of the fight says, does the white man understand our customs about land? How can he when he does not even speak our tongue? But he says that our customs are bad. And our brothers who have taken up his religion also say that our customs are bad. How do you think we can fight when our brothers have been turned against us? The white man is very clever. He came quietly and peaceably with his religion. We were amazed at his foolishness and allowed him to stay. Now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act as one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together. And now we've fallen apart. This line from this fiction work is evocative because in one paragraph it tells the story of the relationship between Christianity and colonization. that the arrogance, the implicit notions of superiority played a major role in this destruction, that this idea that the epistemologies of others, that African epistemology, that Africans had been conceptualizing the notion of one God since 4,500 years before the Common Era. That someone could come and sort of say, oh, do you know that there's God? That Africans had been thinking about the relationship between themselves and the environment. When I was in Uganda hanging out with Philip, you know, we're driving through, and Philip said, we have a proverb here that said, you don't kill the baby trees because they grow up to be the forest. That Africans have been conceptualizing, they're not alone in this. But there is this relationship to supremacy that thinks that there's only one way of knowing, that there's only one way of being, that you gotta be like me or you're not being at all. This is at the heart of so much of our Christian practice, even today. The church has to look one way. Now, some of this work is good. We've started deconstructing. We still got somewhere to go. But missionary activity wasn't limited just to church. It was also tied to education. In an increasingly integrated capitalist world, this type of education was seen to have some value, and it helped to facilitate the process of colonization. It's very important. There's a quote often attributed to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, but probably many Africans have said it as well, that when the missionaries came, we had the land and they had the Bible. They told us to close our eyes and have a prayer. When the prayer was over, they had the land and we had the Bible. Another poignant illustration of the consequence, of the impact. Now, there's also a story of resistance. There's also a story that many African political, intellectual, military leaders use this education as a form of resistance. People like Patrice Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah were raised in missionary schools and practiced that against them. So that tradition is there. But largely, the story of the expansion of Christianity, even up to our times, is a story of colonization. Theological and ideological domination continue to be a part of this. And while the formal political control of some colonies has ended, at least for Africa, but I'm looking at Allison, who would say, well, there's some other places that are deeply colonized. I mean, I'm sure Mitri is going to tell us about this, but you know, Palestine, because it was colonized by the British in 1914, is handed over to Israel in 1948 because it's colonized. The British said, sure, you can have it. And actually what Amy Cesar says is that part of the reason why they did that is because they didn't want to address anti-Semitism in Europe. So they moved the problem. Okay, I'll let Mitri deal with that. So then, how do we begin this process of colonization? If we take colonization and its impact seriously, how do we begin to decolonize? There are a number of theories that we can propose. A number of post-colonial theorists sort of work on this. I think we heard great insights from Mia, Reverend Ben. There's a wilderness perspective. There's a perspective from Latin America. There are other perspectives from the global South. Some of our partners who are here have their perspective, and this is why we're doing this, to engage with as many perspectives as possible, to say, what are you seeing? How do we do this? What are you noticing? So it's not a perspective that I can offer the last word on, contributing to an ongoing conversation. But what I will say, and my friend Reverend Alexis Tardy helped me with this, that one insight we're sort of ruminating with that isn't Christian, in fact, that's anti-Christian, because of its relationship to colonization, but still worth our reflection, comes from Frantz Fanon, who said, the last shall be first and the first last. Decolonization is putting into practice this sentence. That is why, if we try to describe it, all decolonization is successful, because it's a practice. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. It's putting into practice this sentence. Now, Fanon was a Marxist, anti-imperialist, atheist, but it's almost like this brother is quoting y'all's scripture. I think a part of our engagement with decolonization has to be a serious engagement with the practice of asking, well, who's first and why? How do you get to be first? Why are they first all the time? And who can take the lead in implementing how to rearrange that? I'm sure a lot more can be said. The current structure doesn't allow for it, even though I contributed to it. So let's open up. Let's take just a couple of questions, if they're here, to sort of ruminate then on these possibilities, hopefully, and imagination, and potential way forward. Any questions? Reflections, observations? Yes, I know some folk need a second to process, so feel free to take that. Tony?
So we know the Christian church has apologized for its history of anti-Semitism. Has the Christian church ever renounced the doctrine of discovery and its participation in colonization?
The question was, we know that the Christian church has apologized for its relationship to anti-Semitism. Has the Christian church apologized for its relationship to the doctrine of discovery and colonization? Is there anyone that wants to speak for the Christian church? Okay, this is good. You want to, intervene.
I just want to say, which Christian church are you talking about? Because as we look at the globe, we have all different ideologies coming out of the Christian tradition. And so many of these are tied to money. And so when we look at what helps nations or what helps countries, it so often is tied to money and colonization. So how do you divest people from being so concerned about money?
You know, what this makes me think of then, especially in regards to the question of which Christian church, in the North American context, what becomes the United States, the tradition that I try to tie myself most closely to, the religion of those descendant from enslavement, I think was an anti-colonial establishment in its original form. As it expanded, we got some problems. But its original form, it's a place of plurality, of gathering. I mean, you take the communion song, let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Allah, have mercy on me. That those folk recorded the different religious perspectives, the ring shout and what they did, African epistemology, this realization that sure you can run around, because you got to embody relationship to the spirit. So you're absolutely right to further critique the framing, right, and say, well, the Black religious tradition in its origins has some observations. Very good. I like that. Other interventions? We doing this together. We got a little bit of time. Yes, of course. What would we be if not for the womanist theologians in our midst?
I have a question. I think you brilliantly laid out the role of violence in colonization. Can you talk about the role of violence in decolonization? Yep. The role of violence in decolonizing. The role of violence in decolonizing. Well, okay, so I am thinking about like Franz Fanon in this context, who basically says you cannot decolonize without violence because we colonize with violence. So the role of decolonizing between the settler and the native, because the settler created the native, right? Created the savage is the way I think about it. So in order for decolonization to happen, it requires violence as a part of that historical process.
Does Fanon help us to understand what violence mean, or is violence the definition that we understand it to be?
I think Fanon helps us understand what violence means because he's speaking in his particular context, right? Like he's writing this in the context of war. So from his particular context, he's looking at it while he's writing it. So I guess I'm curious for us, we're obviously not in the same context, but in order to make decolonization more concrete and not only sometimes the abstract ways that we talk about decolonization, I guess I'm tiptoeing into the more uncomfortable, like if we're really talking about, we're in a colony. So if you're talking about colonization and you're still naming that we live in a colony, like right now in America, what does it look like to decolonize? And what's the role of violence when colonization was a violent endeavor?
Alexis, that's you are absolutely the expert, and you have this profound insight. You know, I think that's funny enough, the moral question today. Let me say one or two things in response to that. So a part of how I understand, a part of what Fanon is doing is he's saying that this is going to be a conflict, that a system secured on violence isn't going to relinquish it. It's very different, it's not that different from what Frederick Douglass said. Frederick Douglass said there's no struggle without progress. I mean, there's no progress without struggle. Now, the question is, how do you make people do it? How do you incentivize, influence? My angle, my perspective, which I reflect upon often, is that you start with an appeal to conscience. You start there. I think you start with an appeal to conscience. And you describe the world that we live in. I think a part of what makes your question so apt is y'all really think about this. We do live in a colony, and for real, what's gonna happen in November? Are we contending with this possibility? Now, there are some people who say, well, I've been living through November since 1545. Okay, that's reality too. But also, I think Christians have to contend with the moral dilemma we find ourselves in to imagine a different type of theology, politic, relationship to community, one another. This is how I begin to sort of think about that, but it's much more can be said. Milton, you have a question?
Yes, sir.
I say Reverend Dr. Milton. Yes.
God bless you. And I'll tell you why I asked this question after I asked it.
Okay.
Why are we doing this work? Are the individuals or segments or minorities that even the decolonizers are leaving behind?
So just so I'm clear, why are we doing this work when even
While we are doing the work, are we still leaving certain groups behind? And I'm asking you this as a disability theologian.
Do you want to tell me why you asked it, or you want me to answer?
I just said I'm asking this. Answer it, then I'll tell you
Okay.
why.
Okay. The answer is absolutely, absolutely, and I think that a recognition of limitations, of humility, and of problems has to be associated with this. That our language and infrastructure, even what's deemed to be most progressive, is woefully, in my view, inadequate to contend with our reality. And so it's no surprise to me that even as I aspire to think most expansively, that there's a fundamental limitation in the possibilities because of the structure. So, yes.
The reason why I asked that, because I grew up in a liberation type church, still conservative, but black church is inherently liberal. But I'm learning as I do my research and I reflected that there's some groups that even liberators don't want to be. So nobody wants to be disabled because they think it weakens the ability to do the work. So they'll ignore disability and they'll free everybody else because somehow they think being disabled hinders the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Absolutely. You can't hold on to it because I think this is working now. I think Milton, you're absolutely right. There's a way in which, we think, right, to kind of rephrase what you're saying for me, that we think that people who are disabled or different in other ways, that they hinder the possibilities as opposed to expanding the possibilities, right? A part of what I'm pushing is that we have to reorient ourselves. I'll share this brief story, then I'll wrap up. Because I know y'all want to go to lunch. The first time I visited with the Alliance of Baptists of Brazil, we're hanging out. I do not speak Portuguese, but we're actively in deep theological conversation. Now, how that's happening, I don't know. I don't speak Portuguese, but we're arguing and talking and understanding each other, like, yeah, and contributing, yeah, it's fire, amazing. It said, Elijah, now we were speaking through a translator because we wanted to make sure we got this. It said, Elijah, this was really great. We love the partnership, we love the friendship, but make sure you tell your people not to try to colonize us. I've been sitting with that for 2.5 years. I'm giving it to y'all. I think that as we reorient ourselves, I think perhaps it's a humility in saying, you know what, there's like a lot that we don't know and there's more that we want to try to do differently. To say, actually, what is our criteria for what goes against the good? I think this is what Mia was talking about in the sermon today. To say, actually, we got to revisit the image of God and our understanding of that as a starting point. Not that we're going to get all the answers, right? A part of the wisdom that comes out of the marginalized tradition by the imperial societies is that we can still function and be together without certainty. That's the new door. That's at least the door we gotta start walking through. A lot more can and will absolutely be said. Deb, do you want to say? Sure.
How can we decolonize without violence was the question that came up. And I think asking the question is wrong if we are the colonizers, because it means we're still trying to lay the ground rules. So I'm thinking about Hamas, and pardon me for being unpopular, but I can't judge their use of violence when they have been fighting this for 100 and however many years. I think about the racial uprisings of 2020 and the constant refrain anytime there's a protest of you're not doing it the way we wish you would, so we're not going to pay attention to the agenda that you have laid out. I think asking the question of how we decolonize without violence is not our question to ask.
Wow. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right in that regard, and I think this is a part of what Frantz Fanon is getting at in Wretched of the Earth, and what Angela Davis gets at in Race, Class, and Gender. You know, she talks about someone was asking her about being a Black Panther, and she says, look, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. I was born into a situation of violence, literally. That's what she says. She was friends with Addie Mae Collins, blown up in 16th Street Baptist Church on Sunday morning, right? So I think what it pushes is to say, look, our situation is one fundamentally of violence. What I would add, the Christian theologian in me, right, what I would add is to say we're in the tradition of the Prince of Peace, also born in a situation of violence. But what the Prince of Peace has to run away from is the acknowledgement that this is a deeply violent system. And the religion is complicit. And then he walks away and leaves and says, y'all got to deal with that. All right, I'll take your question last, then we'll wrap up, because they want to go to lunch. So I don't want to.
Well, just to follow you up, I think the whole thing is that we have to.
Oh, here.
I think is that we have to be brave enough to be disruptive and use our imagination how we can, because the system is violence. In our own communities, whether we're working with immigrants or whatever, poverty or unfair housing, we have to be creative in how we disrupt and push back by not falling into the mold of what society says is the way to do things, the logic, but to reverse the logic. And I think that's what Jesus did.
It's to really undermine it.
Yes, undermining the way
in
it is.
embodiment.
Yes, and to be disruptive is to make a lot of people uncomfortable, including people that might be your allies, but they're uncomfortable. But that's what it means to be disruptive, and that's what Jesus did.
Huh? They might call it disruption violence, Michael Ray says. Because you took white Jesus down from the stained glass window. Okay, that's easy. Then we'll go to lunch. Let me just say this. You pushed me there. You took white Jesus out of the Bible. Okay, no. You took white Jesus out of the liturgy. Everything you read is black and womanist. You got all these people talking. You did it by force. You didn't ask me. We didn't take a vote for it. But you called the person to be the pastor. You trusted their wisdom, who inspired them. Okay, I'm really done.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. This is all changing before my eyes. Literally, and I can't see it. Thank you, Elijah. I get to do this every day. He's a conversation partner like no other, and I'm glad that you all get to share some time with him. Okay. Stephanie's right here to help me. So lunch will start at 12:20, so you have a little bit of time if you want to wait. And so workshops will start at 1:30. Okay, now this part I have to read. It's a lot of stuff about your name tag and what you get to eat. Hold on. Here we go. Ready? So this year you signed up for lunch. This was because in prior years we had so much left over and it felt wasteful. If you look at your name tag, in the corner, you will find an F and an S. These are the indication for what lunch you signed up for. Meat, vegetarian, vegan, gluten is right there in the corner. It says what you're doing. When you get to the serving line, we ask that you take the lunch that corresponds with your name tag. Vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free. If for some reason you did not register for a lunch and you wanted to eat here, just hang out and see if there's anything left over. What is it you used to say, Carol? Family goes last. There was family hold back. That's what it is. The lunch line is located outside of Heaton Hall, so it's in the same place where you got the pastry and the fruit this morning. And there's plenty of seating inside Heaton Hall for you to sit down and have lunch. The Alliance communities will be gathering during lunch, and so if you look on page 17 in the program, you can see which communities are where, so you can grab your lunch and head to these locations. If not, find somebody to eat with in Heaton Hall. And you do not have to have any prior history with these communities. It's an excellent time to find out what's going on in a community and see if you're interested. And then after lunch, the workshops will gather in various locations, and those are in the program as well on pages 12 through 14. Okay, so to recap, lunch is at 12:20. The name tag tells you what to get to eat. (1:30). Thank you for asking. They will start at 1:30. So we have about an hour and 20 minutes to get all that stuff I just said done. Thank you. Yes, yes. Oh,